lockdown measures are strictly enforced.
All the places that are empty now, arenas, schools, public places, streets.
Police were called after some customers started fighting over toilet paper and water.
We slashed red tape to develop vaccines and therapies as fast as it can possibly be done.
Drugs that were developed originally for HIV and for the flu. There are anecdotes of them being used and people getting better, and the virus is clearing very quickly.
We must look out for each other. We must pull each other through this. Because if there's one thing that is more contagious than this virus, it is love and compassion.
I don't have to say anything. We all know. These are unprecedented times. Since the first report of COVID-19 in Wuhan, China, it has spread all over the globe. As China grappled with the crisis, the world watched. It seemed distant to most, but then, slowly and surely, a wave of infections began to appear in your city. Governments, health officials, and the public scrambled to make sense of the situation, and drastic changes were made. For many, the ceasing of everyday life has become a surreal shock not experienced since the Second World War. It's a difficult time for most, as confusion and uncertainty prevail. There's certainly been chaos, but also hope. In this episode, we'll be covering some of the tools that are being used to battle the disease. Scientists and doctors around the world are using the internet to publish information faster than ever before. This has yielded some potential solutions while we wait for a vaccine that could be over a year away. Treatments with existing drugs have shown to be working in very early trials. This special episode will include a chat I had with Dr. Gerald Evans, an infectious disease specialist from Canada. We'll get to the solutions a bit later, but first, we must understand the enemy.
You are watching Cold Fusion TV.
COVID-19, otherwise known as the coronavirus, is an infectious disease caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It's around 10 to 34 times more fatal than the flu, though it's hard to know exactly how many people have milder cases, so the true fatality rate may be lower. The incubation period of the virus has been reported to be around 2 to 14 days, with a median of 5 to 6 days. One case study suggests that the incubation period could extend out to 24 days, although this hasn't been verified widely. But this long incubation period is what makes this disease dangerous. You can be infected for quite a while and not feel sick, while unknowingly passing it to others. This phenomenon is known as asymptomatic transmission. A joint study by 7 researchers found that over 80% of the people in Wuhan weren't recorded, and most of them weren't showing severe symptoms. Speaking of which, what are the symptoms of this illness? Well, according to one study, the most common symptom is a fever at 87% of people experiencing that, and then a dry cough at 67%, and next, fatigue at 38%. But interestingly, there's some new data suggesting that a loss of smell may be an early indicator. Studies have shown that the virus can live on surfaces anywhere from a few hours to a couple of days, depending on the surface material. As you've all heard, this is why you should practice frequent and thorough hand washing, and also avoid touching your mouth, nose and eyes where the virus can enter. So why does washing your hands work? Well, the virus has a fatty layer on its outside which breaks down with soap, destroying its effectiveness. So something that's not really talked about is how exactly this virus kills people. It's a bit grim, but it's important information. Although COVID-19 can damage the kidneys, heart, and male reproductive organs, COVID-19 kills by the development of acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS for short. It all starts with our lungs. Think of it like this. If the main part of our lungs are a tree trunk and branches, our alveoli are the leaves. They're the little tiny sacs on the end of our lungs that extract oxygen from our blood. Human lungs have about 600 million alveoli. ARDS is worse than pneumonia because with pneumonia, it's only a local inflammation, whereas ARDS inflames all of the alveoli across the entire lung. The inflammation of the alveoli stops oxygen from getting into them, and to make things worse, they fill up with liquid. The consequence is that you can't breathe, and without intervention, you could suffocate. To stop this, A patient with ARDS will need ventilation until the swelling goes down. In some cases, this can take upwards of 2 weeks. Remember this detail. This is why hospitals are quickly running out of space. It's because people that need intensive care and need assistance breathing can stay in there for a long time. And this is why it's so important to stop the spread of this disease. Let's talk about that. The point is slowly getting across now, but until recently, many people were still dismissive about this. To them, this was just the flu and a big fuss over nothing, but they didn't understand the problem. The first part of the problem lies in mathematics. It seems that people don't understand exponentials. Admittedly, they're unintuitive to us humans. A good example popularized by Chris Martenson is as follows. Imagine a baseball stadium. If you started with a drop of water that doubles every 2 seconds, guess how long it would take to fill up? A few days? A couple of weeks? A year? Not even close. It would take 50 minutes to fill up. Even more unintuitively, at 45 minutes, the stadium would be 93% empty. In other words, 93% of the stadium is filled up in the last 5 minutes. This is essentially the same law that the virus follows. It's essentially an exponential growth pattern. For example, 1 person infects 2, and 2 people infect 4, and 4 people infect 8, etc. And by the time you know it, the numbers have exploded. To put that into perspective to what's happening now, the first 100,000 cases took 90 days. The second 100,000 cases took 12 days. And the third 100,000 cases took 4 days. So to explain why this is happening, we need to discuss something called an R0 factor. This represents, on average, how many people a single person can infect. A value above 1 means the virus will spread, and below 1 means the virus will die out. But the thing is, the R0 value is not intrinsic to the virus. It depends on environmental conditions and the behavior of a culture or society. According to multiple epidemiology teams, this novel coronavirus is said to have an R0 between 1.4 and 5.5. So 1 person could spread it to more than 5 people, but we have the power to change this value. For example, in South Korea, extreme amounts of testing allowed for the locations of the virus to be known, so people and their contacts could be isolated. This greatly reduced the spread of the disease, and so far, they've got it under control. Flattening the curve. It was first trending on Twitter a few weeks ago, and then soon every government official was saying it, and now I'm sure we've all heard of it. It's the practice of social distancing, otherwise known as physical distancing, to slow the rate of spread so that hospital systems don't become overwhelmed with those who are most at risk. At first, most people thought it was the elderly and those with underlying health conditions, but later data is starting to show that younger people are starting to end up in trouble, and nobody seems to know exactly why just yet. For some practical examples, here's the difference between 2 cities in Italy, Bergamo and Lodi. Lodi had the first case of COVID-19 in all of Italy and implemented a shutdown on February 23rd, while Bergamo waited until March 8th. We also have some hard data from the Spanish flu of 1918. Here's the difference between mitigation and no mitigation in 2 different cities, Philadelphia and St. Louis. So most countries were too late to implement South Korea's policy, but flattening the curve does work. But there is one major problem with it. It intrinsically kills economies, and this is why a lot of governments were very slow to adopt the measure. Some of you may have heard of this, but it's a pretty interesting anecdote. One lady, who became known as Patient 31, defied calls to get tested and instead went to a buffet and 2 packed church services where she ended up infecting over 1,000 people. According to the Korea Center for Disease and Control Prevention, she may single-handedly have caused 80% of the virus cases in South Korea. So that's an example of what not to do and why it's important to keep social interactions to a minimum. Okay, so now that we're familiar with the virus, let's move on to some good news. Let's discuss some of the emerging treatments that are coming out now. So for right now, a vaccine is out of the question. Most experts think that's at least a year away. So why so slow? Well, vaccines have to go through many stages before they're deemed safe. I'll give you one example to highlight why this takes time. Back in the 2000s, scientists were trying to make a SARS vaccine in animals. The vaccine elicited an immune response and produced antibodies like it was supposed to. So that seemed good, but upon reinfection, the immune system of the subject animals went into overdrive and killed the animal. So we really don't want to rush something out like that to the entire human population. That being said, Phase 1 trials have started in Seattle and are set to start in other places around the world. Because of these desperate, war-like conditions, scientists are skipping past the animal trials and going straight to human subjects. This is very risky, but the scientists conclude that it's necessary. While we wait for a vaccine, a treatment is needed for infected patients, or even as a preventative measure to stop people from getting ill in the first place. I'm not going to go through all of them here, but just for your information, there's at least 35 possible treatments that are showing promise. If you're interested in reading more about them, I'll leave a link below. However, out of all of these, there's one that's standing above the rest: hydroxychloroquine. It comes in another form called chloroquine, and we'll be talking about both here. These drugs are interesting, not just because of their potential, but also because of the controversy surrounding them. From being hailed as a cure for the coronavirus, to being blamed for the death of a 60-year-old man who took COVID-19 treatment into his own hands. It's a bizarre story, but let's try and cut through the noise and figure out what's going on here. Chloroquine has a long history. During the 1600s in Peru, the indigenous people extracted the bark from the cinchona plant. They used this bark to fight chills and fever. In 1934, chloroquine was first identified in Western science and used for malaria. Since then, it's had a wide range of uses, anything from HIV treatment to autoimmune diseases. According to Lancet Infectious Diseases, there aren't any significant detrimental side effects, but recently this has come under debate, and we'll talk about this later. So how does it work? The following information is from Dr. Seahilt of MedCram. So here's a cell in your body, and this is a virus. Inside of it is some RNA replication instructions, drawn in green. The viruses like to attach to something called an ACE2 receptor, which is found in large amounts inside of our lungs. Once the virus attaches itself, it releases its RNA into our cells. Sadly, our cell's internal machinery read the RNA, which gives it instructions to produce more of the virus RNA. The coronavirus has basically hijacked our cells to make more of itself. Once the replication is complete, the new viruses detach themselves and go off to infect more cells, repeating the process. So what can be done? Well, it turns out that zinc in iron form disrupts this replication process. So if everyone just takes zinc tablets, we'll be fine, right? Well, wrong. Zinc basically has zero intracellular penetration when consumed. In other words, zinc ions can't get into a cell by themselves. In order to do that, they need something called an ionophore. Essentially, an ionophore is a key that unlocks the door for zinc to get through into the cell. In addition to changing the pH levels in such a way that stops the virus from bonding, chloroquine is an ionophore. And this is where things get interesting. Early studies for COVID-19 treatment are showing promising signs. A French study conducted tests on 36 patients. 20 were treated with the drug and 16 were a control group. After 6 days, 100% of the 20 patients tested negative. This number was less than 20% for the control group. Although encouraging, this study has been criticized for its design, and Dr. Evans also says, not so fast.
The issue with other things like hydroxychloroquine, the use of an HIV drug called Kaletra or lopinavir, ritonavir, it's a mixture, and even the use of an antibiotic called azithromycin, that's a little bit more tough to decide whether or not we're actually seeing a good signal of effectiveness. And the reason for that is that most of those have been in open label use. In other words, a physician's just decided, I got nothing to lose here, I'm just going to give it to the patient. And maybe that patient would have improved anyways. So we really need trials that look at comparators of similar patients who did get it and didn't get it. And I guess I am optimistically hopeful that hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine, which is a relatively cheap generic drug that at least, if we can gather enough data, they may work, and who's the right person to use it in and when should we use it? And those are big unanswered questions that we may not really have the answers to until this has really gone into its later phase. But I'm cautiously optimistic. How's that? I probably should have started with that. It would have prevented me all these other words from flying out.
Despite this, everyone from China to Norway, Australia, France, and the United States, and many other countries are employing chloroquine or its safer cousin, hydroxychloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine has been shown to be 40% less toxic in animal studies. In late March, the Indian National Task Force instructed doctors to take hydroxychloroquine as a preventative measure against COVID-19. So how did we get here? How did scientists pick chloroquine, a decades-old drug, as a candidate to battle COVID-19? As far back as 2005, experiments on cells showed a 90% reduction in the SARS coronavirus when treated with chloroquine, though this study was limited as the drug was only added 5 hours after infection. Though the interesting part was that chloroquine showed 100% prevention of the SARS virus with just 10 micrograms, meaning that it may even prevent the SARS coronavirus in the first place. The conclusion of the study basically was, this is extremely effective, but we need more studies in animals. Reason being, the results of experiments in cells may not translate 100% in living flesh. Fast forward 15 years, and a Chinese study on the 4th of February 2020 found an 100% destruction of COVID-19 with just 10 micrograms. Again, this was done in cell culture and not in humans. Nevertheless, the study concluded, quote, "Chloroquine is a cheap and safe drug that has been used for more than 70 years. Therefore, it is potentially clinically applicable against the 2019 nCoV." Around the same time in early February, chloroquine phosphate was selected from tens of thousands of existing drugs to fight COVID-19 by Chinese scientists. A press conference was held to announce this. On February 17th, Chinese scientists ran a trial of 100 patients in 10 hospitals. They concluded that the drug should be included in the official guidelines of COVID-19. At this time, while the world was battling the crisis, word of the Chinese studies started reverberating around the world. Soon South Korea would also issue guidelines including chloroquine as an effective treatment. On March 10, 2020, Raymond James and Associates wrote a piece titled, "If a COVID-19 therapy doesn't benefit a stock, does it even exist?" And in the piece, you can hear the frustration of medical researchers. Quote, "You may not have read much about chloroquine yet, since it doesn't benefit any stocks. If we had to pick a treatment at this point that actually seems most likely to have the biggest impact on treating COVID-19 in the coming years and months, it would be chloroquine." They go on. Chloroquine shouldn't be left out of the discussion of COVID-19 therapies and may actually be leading the pack. Interestingly, the patent for chloroquine expired long ago, so now it's a generic drug, meaning that there's no money to be made. On March 17th, a trial of the medication began in 50 hospitals in Queensland, Australia. As of March 23rd, over 20 more hospitals across Australia have asked to use hydroxychloroquine in studies with over 2,400 patients.
What we're doing is we're going to look at 2,400 Australians and rigorously study these drugs and see what happens.
But you suspect it's the magic of the combination, do you?
That's what we suspect.
How confident are you that these drugs will work?
My guess is that this is probably going to be about 80% there. 80% chance of success.
On the 18th of March, the news outlet Axios reported that the drug company Bayer will supply chloroquine to the US government for potential use if approved. So all of this was looking bright for the drug until March the 20th. On the 20th of March, in a press conference, Donald Trump had announced that the FDA had approved chloroquine for the fight against COVID-19.
It is known as a malaria drug, and it's been around for a long time, and it's very powerful.
The drug, chloroquine, has been used to treat malaria since 1944. Early testing in the US show it's effective at preventing and treating severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, a close cousin to COVID-19.
Just minutes later, the FDA came out and said that this wasn't the case. However, the drug would be fast-tracked and looked at harder for a potential treatment. A lot of red tape would be cut. After this, something strange happened though. After the announcement, people rushed out and bought and hoarded the medication, presumably to use it to protect themselves against COVID-19. This took the drug away from those who actually needed it for their health. Hoarding the medication is truly unfair to those who need it. It's a selfish action that could leave vulnerable people stranded and seriously at risk. News outlets like Bloomberg and the New York Times ran reports saying that Trump mentioning the drug as a possible game changer was irresponsible. People came out of the woodwork saying that the drugs were dangerous and could cause a mass number of deaths. This was all happening while I was researching. It was bizarre to see the script flip so quickly in real time. A French professor who ran a clinical trial using the drug against COVID-19 expressed his shock at how these commonly used drugs were suddenly being labelled as poison at just the precise point where the world needs them.
Et je ne sais pas d'où ça vient, mais enfin de mettre que l'hydroxychloroquine qui a été prescrite aussi à des millions de personnes, gens qui mangent ça pendant 30 ans, que c'est un poison, ça laisse absolument rêveur. Hein, qu'on ait découvert juste au moment où on a besoin que c'est un poison, c'est absolument étonnant. Je ne sais pas d'où ça sort, peut-être qu'un jour.
The main reason for the negative sentiment is that people are going to take hydroxychloroquine without professional medical guidance, and this is indeed dangerous. On March 23rd, a 60-year-old man consumed fish tank cleaner with chloroquine as an active ingredient. The formula was different to the medical version of the drug, and the man ended up dying. Not only this, but if you have a heart condition, chloroquine can actually be fatal as it causes heart irregularities. To add to this, blindness is a rare but known side effect of long-term use. There are also negative interactions with existing medications which have to be looked at. The studies mentioned earlier screened for these risks and excluded candidates that would have a bad reaction. Of the anecdotes I've read, most mention no side effects, but some do complain of nausea and even peeling of the skin. Looking at the official common side effects, most of them seem to be pretty mild, but it's the rare reactions that are concerning. And it shouldn't have to be said, but in no way should you take a drug like this without medical guidance. Despite these extraordinary events, some doctors are already prescribing hydroxychloroquine to infected patients after assessing the risks, and it is just tentatively showing to be effective.
Now joining us via Zoom is Dr. Jeff Collier. He's the former governor of Kansas and a practicing physician who wrote an eye-opening op-ed in the Wall Street Journal advocating the use of hydroxychloroquine in two ways: to treat patients and as a prophylaxis to protect healthcare workers from infection.
We looked at the data, we looked at hearing what was going on around the world, and after the test tube confirmation, we found there's a French study and then also a Chinese study and several anecdotal reports that this is an effective drug, and frankly, it's our only option. What we want to do is we are treating those patients who have tested positive. We are also treating their immediate family members that they are quarantined in with as well. The second group that we're looking at is for providers who have a serious exposure. The EMT who intubated somebody in the field, making sure that they get a course of this medication. Also, though, people seem to have a better outcome when given early to them.
And that is the bottom line here. There is some hope. Anecdotally, it tentatively seems to be working, but we should still be cautious in our optimism.
Well, he was basically on death's door for the first couple days in the ICU. They gave him a very low survival chance, and about 2 days into his stay in the ICU, they put him on the medicine, and he's taken a significant turn for the better, and looks like he's going to make it.
Oh, thank goodness.
There's a direct correlation to me taking it and me feeling better 10 hours later.
52-year-old Rio Giardineri says the reason he's still alive is because hydroxychloroquine, an old anti-malaria medicine.
It started out with the fever and the headache, and then progressed to heavy sweating, and then I developed a very bad pain and
Doctors put him on oxygen in the ICU, but he says he was still unable to breathe. After more than a week in isolation, with it getting harder to breathe, he said his goodbyes to his wife and 3 children.
There's certain people in the world you can't check out of without saying goodbye to. And no matter who you are, no matter what scenario you're in, you're never prepared.
Then a friend sent him a recent article about hydroxychloroquine. It has already proven successful to treat coronavirus patients overseas, though it hasn't been approved by health officials. After some back and forth with an infectious disease doctor, he was authorized to take the drug.
So basically woke up at exactly 4:45 in the morning with no symptoms. It was pretty crazy. I woke up, looked directly at the clock, and it dawned on me, wait a minute, I can breathe. My wife says, what's wrong with you? I said, what do you mean? She goes, you sound normal. So that was a sure sign that something had gone right.
He's since had no fever or pain, feels fine, and he's able to breathe again.
Yeah, I'm 100% convinced this is what saved my life.
Although it's not completely settled and there is some controversy over it, many researchers do think that it could turn the tide in the battle against the virus. But fundamentally, we'll just have to wait for the results of these studies to make sure. Like Dr. Gerald Evans said, maybe these people might have gotten better anyway. It could be possible that the chloroquines are just a big red herring, but I really hope that's not the case. I'm going to be so interested in seeing the results of further studies. Here's former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb on the issue.
The hydroxychloroquine, the president keeps saying there's a good chance that it could have a great impact. Can you separate fact from fiction?
Well, look, it is being used. This drug was being used off-label by doctors around the country prior to it sort of becoming the subject of a lot of discussion at a national level. The data, there's both in vitro data, meaning in test tubes, as well as clinical data coming out of China and also a study out of France. It's very preliminary, and it's a very small number of patients. Certainly something that we should follow up on, and there are going to be proper clinical trials underway.
It must also be noted that this kind of treatment can't be used on patients who are too far advanced in their illness. This is because by the time they're in serious trouble, the virus has pretty much left the system at this point, leaving the body to fight it off. And at this point, antivirals aren't going to work. Hot on the heels of the chloroquines is another drug showing promise. It's a Japanese flu drug called favipiravir. It works through the same ionosphere mechanisms as chloroquine. A Chinese clinical study of 340 patients showed 91% improved versus 62% of the control group. The head of China's Science and Technology Ministry stated, quote, "It has a high degree of safety and is clearly effective in treatment," end quote. A Chinese study in late March showed the possibility of using the blood of the recovered to treat the sick. In the study, 5 critically ill patients were given antivirals and were in ICU. The doctors gave them blood plasma that contained antibodies of COVID-19 survivors. The results? ARDS resolved in 12 days, and 3 patients were released from hospital, while the other 2 were stable. So that doctors don't have to go around finding survivors and taking their blood, it's proposed that the cells that actually make the antibodies can be cloned and then be used to produce a mass treatment. Again, this is hopeful, but these are early days and we have to wait for more studies. Along with the over 30 other treatments that are being looked at, there's a good chance that we could have some options to fight COVID-19 in the coming months. So there is a reason to have some tentative hope. Although this is a hard time, it's important to know that progress is being made. Some of the smartest minds are pulling together. Also, in this whole situation, there's been a remarkable side effect that I've seen. A shared sense of adversity has done something interesting. It's brought people together. Community is starting to come back after its erosion in the past 30 years. I've seen strangers on Facebook offering to help the elderly get their groceries. I've seen groups come together to help nurses and check on their mental health. Yes, some people were panic buying and fighting in stores, but these other groups of people are showing that we can rise above. This tough time could make us realize what's important in life: loving each other, family, and helping each other. And that's encouraging to see. So that's about it, but I have to give a very important shout out to the nurses and the doctors who are working hard on the front lines, and all of this with very little direction from their respective governments. You guys are the literal heroes, the soldiers on the front lines. Thank you for the amazing work that you're doing. And lastly, to everyone out there, we're going to get through this. Scientists and researchers across the globe are fighting this. It's a collaborative effort not seen since the Second World War. And the best news of all, I've seen vlogs from people living in China, and they're starting to emerge from this disaster. It's early proof that this eventually will end. In the meantime, please stay safe. In good humour, I'll leave you with a few gems from Italy's quarantine. We all got a laugh, right? If you're bored at home and just want to see some more cool stuff, I have hundreds of videos on my channel that you can binge. In the next episode, we'll see how technology is helping in the COVID-19 battle, from drones delivering medicine to robots autonomously disinfecting hospitals with UV light. Artificial intelligence is getting involved in lung CT scans to take the load off doctors, and also to analyze your cough to diagnose you instantly. All of this and more in the next episode of Cold Fusion. Thanks for watching. My name is Dagogo. You've been watching Cold Fusion, and I'll see you again soon for the next episode. Cheers, guys. Stay safe.
Cold Fusion. It's new thinking.